Great. It's great to see so many people here. I am Dan, as Sophia said. This is Rachel. We've put together 30 minutes of content and questions to help you explore a story around some work that Rachel has done. So some work in her organisation. And Mike has helped co-design this as well. So Mike's at the back of the room. He's also from Wonnacott Studios. He's worked with both of us, and he's at the back of the room. So say hi to him later on. And we, as you came in, there was an arrival question in Menti. Hopefully you've had a chance to look at that. You'll go back to that in a minute. And we wanted to start with that rather than something from us. Rachel, is there any other background that you'd want to share about today's talk?
Yes, absolutely. So firstly, I wanted to say a big thank you for being here. I'm on the organising committee. I've just changed outfits so I could get in the zone. Thank you very much. Very proud of this one. It's our second year. It was very popular last year. A little bit of background to this talk. So I was hands-on for a decade and then recently moved into a leadership position. And I recognised that that required different skills to what I was using day to day. And I didn't necessarily feel like I had someone I could ask for advice about gaining those skills. So I looked for some coaching in the form of Mike and Dan, and what we'd like to show you is the behind the scenes of how we work together to build that skill set into the workshops that we're actually still running in a second wave throughout the organisation because they've been that popular.
Okay. Right, let's have a look at some of the responses, and if you haven't had a chance to answer the question, you can do so now. And if you're watching the recording of this session, you won't be able to do this, but we do invite you to leave a comment on the video. Just pause this, leave a comment on the video, and tell us why you even chose to watch this. It would be great to find out. So what's standing out here? So this is your intention in coming here today and joining us. So have a look over the answers you can see here and just see what stands out to you, see what the commonality is.
So I'm quite interested in this one here that says my org has just restructured. I wonder whether that's from one of my own organisation. Perhaps it is. We will be touching on that in this talk.
Yeah. So just have a look over and see what's catching your attention there on some of the reasons that people have come to join us. And Rachel, tell us a bit more about why we're here.
So last year, I presented at FastFlow Conf on using team topologies to reorg from the ground up. So that's that reorganization that we've seen on the previous slide. And at that time, I'd recently joined what we were calling the Fidelity Strategy Working Group, where we'd brought together a cross-section of the organization to reevaluate our use of technology. A little bit more context on that time. We had previously had another strategy not that long ago. There were adverse market conditions in the financial world. There were also adverse market conditions in the technology sector. And as I'm sure you're all aware, lots of large organizations had recently gone through redundancies. So naturally, there was some healthy skepticism as to whether we even needed a new strategy. There was reduced openness to change, and there was also maybe some apathy amongst the employee base. The bottom line, these were all things that were going to adversely impact our ability to deliver on the strategy. Now, as someone that was hands-on, as I've mentioned, I too shared in that skepticism, and I'd also had my own doubts in leadership. But now that I was participating in the working group, I got to see behind the curtain. And what I saw was, it wasn't so much that leadership was out of touch, but struggling to gain the momentum that was going to be required for this kind of organizational change. My personal view was that there was a gap in communication and or buy-in of the previous strategy. And in general, I'm quite a strong believer that people don't actually hate change. They hate change being done to them. And so I was asking myself, what could I do differently with this strategy so that people felt a part of the change? So on the screen here, you can see the flow of my design work. And back in spring of 23, I participated in a workshop with Dan and Mike from Wonnacott Studios on running intentional conversation workshops. And this inspired me to want to run my own series of workshops using intentional conversation as part of that strategy rollout. Why? Well, if you think about the typical announcement of a strategy, it probably looks something like presentation, Q&A, feedback. But I felt this ask for feedback might appear disingenuous because most of the decisions would have already been made and then presented to our people. Consensus is really very hard, particularly in a large-scale organization. And since no strategy will ever be unanimously agreed on by all, if all I gave people to relate to was the wording, I wasn't very confident that we were going to gain that momentum. Instead, Could we foster a cohesive leadership group of aligned individuals who are individually capable of rolling out the strategy in their respective areas? If people felt that they aligned with the ethos, they had confidence in the people leading it, and they felt that they could engage with us, perhaps that would be enough. Okay, so I invite you to look at the screen. We're going to do a little exercise on a fake company. There are some statistics here about what has happened in technology between 2020 and 2023, and there's also some information about what was going on in the business. I'm going to give you a few moments to look at this before I pose you a question. Okay, so while you're looking at these figures, I'd like you to think about what is one thing you would include in a strategy in response to this situation. Give you a few more moments, and I'm going to click on to the next slide. The stats will be in the background of the question.
Ooh.
Right, I'm moving over. Okay, if you've not used Menti before, the lovely Dan is going to talk us through it.
So again, most of you will have used Menti, but if you haven't, you can use the code at the top of the screen if you've just come in the room or you didn't get a chance at the beginning. And have a look at the question. So we're going to ask you to have a think about what you can see in that question. And if you need a reminder of the data, just have a look at the posters we put on either side of the room, or there's one behind me here. So hopefully you're close enough to be able to see the data and just see what stands out in that to you. And based on your knowledge and awareness, answer the question. So, yeah. And if you're watching the video, you won't be able to do this, but we invite you to pause the video and leave a comment on what you would include in your strategy. So just one thing, just whatever's top of mind for you, whatever comes to mind most quickly, just pick something that's even just a couple of words.
Lovely, we have some coming through. So this first one here says, career worries of individuals. We've got value drivers, a second one for value, customer focus, decrease operational costs, efficiency. It's one at the bottom. Identify business drivers for any technology change. Thank you for the scrolling, Dan. Increase growth or balance cost. Connect tech with biz outcomes. I wonder if that's from Cilium. Diagnosis. Diagnosis of what's behind the numbers. Absolutely. Look at what happened to increase SaaS spend so much. Dan, what's standing out to you?
Yeah, I mean, new customer acquisition and auditing SaaS spend. I mean, thank you for sharing these. This is really, it's really good to see this variety of responses coming through. We'll just sit here because I know that it's quite a lot to take in with the data and the questions. So we'll just give everyone another couple of minutes. We've got time to do this. So just have a think. Is there anything else? If you've already answered, you could put another answer in. What's even one thing that you would choose to respond on this situation? And if you've already answered or you're thinking about this, think about the experience that you're having right now and actually being asked to contribute something. Like you're being involved in a decision-making process here, and think about how that feels and what it means to you in this moment as well. So we're just getting a few more answers here.
Okay, we'll just give it a few final moments.
Yeah.
And then Dan is going to take us through a little bit more detail on the coaching that I mentioned that I received from Wonnacott Studios.
Okay. Founder mode. Right up to the moment. Okay. Right. Still collecting answers. I'm just going to move on to talking a bit more about some of the conversations that led to the decision to use that activity. So you've just experienced something that Rachael actually used in a real piece of strategy work, in a workshop that spanned multiple time zones, technical directors all around the world, being asked to contribute something to a strategy, not just being asked to consume it. And as Rachael said earlier, there's a convention to the way that a top-down strategy is rolled out. So it's a broadcast, right? information is sent one way, and then maybe at some point there's a chance to feed back on that asynchronously. But it's the same pattern, and we wanted to challenge Rachael on it, or actually invite some questions for her that would help explore that a bit. So what you can see on the screen here is something called the 16 design aspects. So it's a set of resources that we used with Rachael to guide conversations, basically. It's a companion, it's a set of resources and a set of questions that we have in the book of prompts. And it started with something called framing. And in fact, what you're doing right now is the result of the conversations like these. So we always start with framing, and framing is a set of questions which allow somebody designing a gathering or a workshop or a set of meetings to think, not just what do I want to get out of this and like the business outcomes, but also what do I want to be different at the end, so they can work backwards from that point. So when you all leave the room, what do we want to have been different for you as a result of being in here for 30 minutes? And in that framing, it also captures something about the relationship that you have with the work. So like, how did we feel about the fact that we had to do this? What were our biggest anxieties about the fact that we had to get you all in this room and do something with you? And how did that affect things? And then from that, we were jumping off to these other conversations. And for Rachael, this idea about commitment and bringing people together was really important. So we knew that growing relatedness was going to be important, the sort of sense of togetherness, and that power relationship between leaders and the people that follow them. So the people with more power and less power, how are they relating to each other? And what will it mean for that commitment and call to action at the end? And then finally inviting dissent, which was really where we actually asked Rachael to think about what it would mean to get people to say no to something, and how could that build more trust. Because in the absence of all of that, when you have a call to action and this sense of corporate commitment, it ends up looking a bit like this. So like we've using this metaphor of a sandcastle of commitment that's just going to get washed away in the next wave of organizational life, and people forget what they said they were committing to last week. And we wanted to have conversations that would help us overcome that. All of this took place, all of this work that we did with Rachael took place in about 2 weeks. And we wanted to show this schedule because although on the surface it looks like just any other sort of mundane detail, how we met to talk about this work that she was doing, there was an intention to the way that we did that. So we reached this workshop delivery stage, or Rachael got to that, and what went into that was intentional, but also the steps that we took to get there were highly intentional. We knew when we were going to meet, and we planned that in advance, and we knew what our working patterns were going to be and what the boundaries of that were going to be. So we had quite a fast feedback loop, and we were able to actually have that intention in the way we got together, right? And then inside those conversations, so every time we did meet, we were using the design aspects and these questions to hop around all these different ideas. So Rachel's going to take you through some more about that in a minute, but it's quite non-linear. So you start off with your framing questions, and then you end up talking about maybe going quite low level all the way down into something like it's quite operational, like we did in here, for example, when we were planning this event. We were saying, oh, well, what's the room going to be like? And how close are people going to be to the screen? And can we use a technology that allows people to see the answers that they just put into a phone? And it turned out that that was actually something that was available to us. But we got to that quite early on in this process. So there's just an example. I think that really the power of these questions is in the asking of them, not the answering of them. I didn't say that. I think I've stolen that from Peter Block, and he's one of our influences that we have behind all of our resources. Right, Rachael, tell us more about framing.
Lovely. So before the engagement that Dan has just alluded to, I had the knowledge from that first workshop that I'd done back in the spring of 23. So before I was working with anyone else, I knew I already wanted to make use of the book of prompts. And you can see some real slides that I presented with Infidelity when I was proposing that I do this. And I really wanted to understand, firstly, what was most important to me, but also what was going to be the most challenging thing to make sure that I achieved that important thing. In simplest terms, and you can see that on screen, I wanted people to identify with the strategy. so that at the end of my workshops, they actually felt personally invested in seeing it to success. But when I was thinking about my audience, and that was 132 directors across both technology and the business, across 9 different time zones, it became very clear that there were logistic and authority challenges that I was going to have to tackle. I needed to tackle wild-scale messaging across a very large international organization, but within the limitations of Zoom and email. Now, typically, if you're in an international organization, you probably just do video conference. I'm well aware of this. But a presentation online versus in person typically captures far less engagement. I'm sure you're all aware of this. None of you right now are checking your emails, I hope. Maybe some of you on your phones. None of you are writing Slack messages. You're not looking at your Jira board. You're not writing code. You're actually participating and making eye contact with me in the room. So I needed to have that in my workshops. But how could I do that online? 90 minutes is a really long time to ask people to pay attention, and I got them to do exactly the same activity that you did at the start, and you can see some of the screenshots from one of the many workshops that we've run. But there was more intention behind this than we've called out. I was getting people to think, and think specifically about strategy, and specifically on topic. So while the figures that you saw aren't quite the same figures as Fidelity, people genuinely were thinking about the real data for our strategy. So they were primed to receive further information on the same topic. I'm going to pause here for a brief moment and acknowledge that what I was doing was a little bit unusual. Fidelity doesn't run these kind of workshops, and I did get a little bit of backlash when I initially suggested that I wanted to do this. Words like warm and fuzzy. Fuzzy, soft, do we need this? Do we want this? Would it be well received? And I recognized, therefore, that there was a little bit of risk associated with me choosing to do this. I was still hands-on at this time. I wasn't a leader, so I was telling leadership how to do their job. I was operating above my station with very little social or reputational capital at my disposal. And, I was a bit worried that was a personal risk to my career. I was looking for a promotion at some time in the near future, and if I didn't pull this off, that was probably going to be a red mark next to my name. So I was at the stage where I really wanted to get feedback, hopefully from someone unbiased and hopefully from someone more experienced. And so I remembered my previous engagement with Dan and Mike, and that's when I sought to get them involved. There's a lot I could say, but I've chosen 3 key focal points, and you can see those on screen. The one I'm alluding to here, hopefully is clear, is feasibility. Could I even pull this off? So ahead of running the workshops, I had to do quite a bit of work to encourage leadership to allow me to do this. And so I showed the story arc. You might have seen the comment of story arc on one of the slides that Dan had earlier, to the rest of the working group and also to the head of strategy. But it wasn't just about getting their approval. It was also about asking their assistance with the workshops. So how exactly did I articulate my vision? And that leads me really nicely into the next topic of dissent. You may recall at the beginning, I stated that I was worried that an ask for feedback would be perceived as disingenuous, which led Dan and I into a discussion around the quote, if you can't say no, how can you actually say yes? Top-down methodologies, or in this case, a mandate of a strategy, would be removing people's ability to say no. So those directors, who were ultimately going to be fundamental in the success of our organizational restructure and this new strategy, probably weren't going to be bought into it. So will we even have the people behind it? And at that point, it wouldn't really matter that we'd done tons of research and market analysis and collected the data. It wouldn't matter that we had a great plan. If we didn't have the people behind it, we weren't going to see any change. So I asked myself, with the help of Mike and Dan, how could I instead invite commitment briefly and personally, right from the beginning of the workshops, rather than mandating it or requesting it at the end. And so instead of asking explicitly for feedback, we chose to ask specific questions to encourage participants to reflect and focus on various aspects of the strategy. What did it mean to them? So 2 particularly fruitful prompts, they're my favorites from the workshops, are on screen. So we have the forces working for our strategy are, and the ever-eventful, the forces working against our strategy are. Curiously, we did observe in some of the workshops that people gave the same answers to both prompts. You can mull that one over for yourself. Drip feeding of interaction points also naturally creates engagement. So right at the beginning, I spoke about the limitations of Zoom and presentation online, because the flow of information is now bidirectional rather than passively consumed. We followed each of these interaction points with breakout rooms to facilitate conversation, which served two purposes. One, it made awareness of differing views. Everyone across the organization was thinking something different, but it also helped to grow what we're calling growing relatedness, which you might have spotted earlier in one of the slides, which leads me on to connection. So if we can't actually guarantee definite commitment on all of the specifics of the strategy, could we instead gain commitment by fostering community and commitment to the overall vision of what we were trying to achieve? Many of the directors, because we have 65 international offices, probably didn't know one another. And if I reflected on the previous strategy, I felt that one of the big blockers had been a lack of shared vision between technology and the business. We're really trying to get away from that, by the way. We want to be one organization, which is only compounded when you don't know one another, you have no personal relationship, and you don't understand what the other person wants or cares about. So the aim here was really just to bring people together, regardless of whether they had differing views. And I was aware that actually the people in the room might think differently to me. So the strategy I was presenting, maybe they didn't agree with that either. Agreement is really great, but I believe that connection is better. People were far more likely to come away from the sessions feeling satisfied if they thought that they had been heard, or maybe they've made a connection with somebody in the room. So to achieve this, I really wanted the feel of the workshop to be egalitarian, not authoritarian. And to do that, I needed to flip the narrative on facilitation. How could we shift that ownership of the workshop back to the participants? Now, the use of Menti is really fantastic for this because it removes the requirement for active facilitation. You don't need to take notes. Menti does that all for you. I've got all your data from your questions so far recorded in Menti. And that allowed us the opportunity to take members of the working group into what we were calling sensors, which is more passive facilitation. They were present in the workshop, they participated in the workshop just like one of you, and they weren't there to be vocal, they were primarily listening. They were on hand to answer questions if you had any, but unless they were directly engaged with as facilitators, they didn't behave in that way. What I'd really like to call out here is that the word sensor is now becoming common language in the working group to indicate that use of low facilitation. Finally, a few subtle nuances I want to call out before passing on to Dan, and that's Menti is really great in an international organization because it allows second language participants to have more time to think and articulate their thoughts in writing. So we had a much greater uptake from some of our other offices that are typically more quiet when we're having difficult conversations. It's super easy to share virtually, and it can be anonymous to invite candor. So now, we'd love to know if there's anything else that you would like to hear about on the workshops.
So, one last chance to contribute something from your side of the room. Something I want to know more about is ... So what would you do to complete that sentence? Again, if you're in the room, so think about that question on your favorite device in front of you. You can respond and then have a look through the answers that we get in a second. If you're watching the video, pause it, add a comment, or look through the other comments we've got in the video on what else do you want to know more about on this conversation. So, let's find out. Something I want to know more about is, and we have, just over 5 minutes left at this point for me and Rachel to pick out what stands out to us, what catches our attention, and we'll try and answer a few questions or pick up on a few topics. We'll just stay silent for a minute and we'll see what answers roll in.
Good to have a pick of the lot.
Yeah.
So I'm probably going to lean towards answering some of the questions about the workshops rather than the strategy itself, just because that's the intention of this talk.
Let's go for it.
So I'll take a theme here. So you've got a couple of people talking about how we ensure that there was connection created, which kind of links into winning over the dissenters, because actually if people aren't agreeing, maybe they feel like they're not creating that connection. So the breakout rooms were 3 to 4 people, and that was very specific. So we had 132 people total, but we wanted to have small rooms for connection. If it's a one-on-one conversation with someone you don't know, and particularly if they're from a culture that you don't recognize, there isn't much sharing. 3 to 4 diffuses this. At the point that you have 5 people, there's not enough time for there to be a conversation and you won't feel heard. So that was the first strategy. Each room had a sensor in it. That person was there to observe and to learn and to feel firsthand the vibes, if you'll allow the Gen Z terminology, as well as what we were seeing in the Menti board. And we could track the number of responses, much like we can do here with the number of people in the room. So we could see which questions were getting more engagement than others. The sensors at the end of the sessions would all meet together and collate the feedback that they heard, but we were really fortunate that lots of people were forthcoming with their feedback. So we offered that both in person, if they wished to speak with me directly, both with the rest of the working group if they felt that I wasn't approachable, and we also had an anonymous feedback form. So lots of people said that they really liked the opportunity to share their voice and their opinion, and they felt that we were open to hearing the negatives. So to link that into dissenters, we wanted to hear that. If I don't know that you're not bought in, how do I change the strategy? How do I address the problem? How do I know who to go and talk to? And so as time went on, we evolved the workshops to adapt to the feedback that we received. We're currently going through and running the workshops for middle management, so the associate directors and senior leaders that look after teams, and anyone that's been identified as having a strong voice. So all of that feedback that we've taken from the Menti has slightly changed the format of the workshops that we're now running. I'm
wondering about this question on how do you know that the community aspect is happening? How is what evidence is there that connection is being created inside? I was wondering if the sensors picked something up.
Yes. So what was really interesting is that we have people talking to one another that didn't know each other previously. So some working groups have actually formed off the back of the workshops from people across different international offices. But for me, the real win is across the technology and business. So we have multiple portfolios that to some extent operate as individual companies, and we'd actually like us to operate as one organization. So to see that collaboration now happening from people that have met during the workshops because they shared similar views has allowed us to penetrate much deeper into the organization.
I see someone's asking here about story arcs, and the slide earlier had what the phrase we use is the arc of the design, and a slightly better explanation of that is it's really the parts of what you want to put together. So whether you're even doing a 10-minute meeting or a series of 6 workshops over months, there's a number of parts to that. And once you've worked out what your framing is, you can understand what parts you need to support that. So that's what we would mean by story arcs. It is kind of a narrative in a way. So if I can scroll any more here, we've got some more stuff at the bottom. So we got how was the engagement facilitated?
Well, that was the point. We didn't really facilitate the engagement. So the sensors were participants. They were able to share their views. They were able to be honest. When I was reading things off the screen, I read everything. I didn't avoid any of the difficult topics. If someone said something deliberately spicy, I quite like to open with that. We wanted to hear it. You can't tell people it's a safe space. They have to feel it. And so you have to behave in the way that you want to see. So by openly acknowledging things that I was frustrated about, and also publicly sharing things that maybe weren't politically correct, but people were feeling within the organization, over time people built confidence to share their views. It was also much more equal. So there was no person leading the session and you felt that they were instructing you. We sat with you in the workshops and spoke to you directly as an equal.
Yeah. I mean, there's so many great questions on here, and obviously more than we can do in the next minute. But we'll be around the rest of the day. We'll be in the hallway track, and we'd love to talk to you more about some of these areas. If you would like a PDF of the slides from today, we can send that to you. So just get in contact on any of our LinkedIns. Just send us a DM or something. Also, someone was asking about the book of prompts, so we'd be happy to show that to you as well, whoever was asking about that. Any other final thoughts, Rachel, before we close
Thank you
out?
very much for being here. I know I was competing with the person that wrote the book, so thank you very much for being here. If you do have any further thoughts or feedback, we'll be around. I probably will be wearing my crew t-shirt, but Dan will look just the same. Thank you so much.
Thanks for coming.